a heroin addict say, if fentanyl was on the street when I was using, I'd be dead. If the sports betting was regulated, I don't know if I'd be sitting here.
Welcome to Investing in Sobriety, the podcast where we explore life, recovery, and the process of rebuilding from substance and process-based addictions. This is a space for real conversations, real experiences, and the transformations that happen when we truly invest in ourselves. I'm honored to introduce Brian Dolan, a professional counselor and gambling addiction specialist in long-term recovery. The odds weren't always in his favor, but he changed the game. With over 8 years in the field and features on ESPN and national outlets, Brian has managed sober living houses, launched collegiate recovery programs, and earned advanced clinical degrees. His story is chaos turned redemption, a passion for sports that spiraled into gambling and substance addiction. Bookies chasing him, bridges burned, until he threw his final Hail Mary into his last rehab. Today, Brian's all in on sobriety, helping clients and families win back their lives. Brian and I connected through a mutual friend that's in the recovery space, and I was extremely interested in connecting with Brian because he has firsthand experience with addiction related to substances. He has experience with gambling and the process that's involved with that. He found himself in recovery, and now he is running his own practice where he helps those who are struggling with gambling in managing their addictions. So thanks for joining us.
I'm pumped to be here. I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So while you've found yourself in a professional situation helping those that struggle with gambling, working in this space was not your story several years ago.
No. I haven't placed a bet in over 8 years. I haven't had a drug or a drink in over 8 years, but it certainly wasn't my goal as a kid to work in this space. As much as I love what I currently do, it's completely different roadmap than I kind of had dreams about growing up, So, yeah, I mean, I work with gamblers. Some gamblers also are struggling with substance use, as I do. But yeah, it's been quite a journey, and it's I'm excited to talk about it. It makes me really happy that people like you are willing to learn about it and get the message out there, and that excites me.
That's good to hear, because when I started doing this, I had to really realign my thought process on the space, because I thought people doing this were very ego-driven, and that's not where I was acting from, right? I told you in the beginning, my desire is to have you be the captain and really try to navigate it, but the learning process is really a part of my recovery process as well.
Sure.
And ultimately, the idea is to help those that are watching this and listening to this in their recovery process. So how did you find yourself in active addiction and pursuing recovery? And I guess give us a quick snapshot of what life kind of looked like before that as well, because I think that plays an important role.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in a good home in Massachusetts. I felt like I got all the proper education about not only drugs and alcohol, very like Irish background, so had people all over, your grandfather's this, your uncle's this, and so I got all those preemptive warnings. And even on the gambling side, my dad's one of his biggest clients had his son was like deep into the bookies back in the day when it was more like mob based. It's now, since obviously like super regulated, and your FanDuel and your DraftKings. I guess the mob came up to, like, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Berkshire County, Western Massachusetts, and came up there and killed this kid, And it was, so I had the reason I say that isn't to be dramatic, but I had all the warnings from my family. In the 12-step world, so sports were like a big part of my life. And not only sports, but also the consumption of sports. So, like, one of the stories I tell is like Christmas morning, coming down the stairs and a Christmas tree to my left and like Sports Center to my right. Like I had to first, like that's the type of like 6, 7, 8-year-old kid that I was. Like everything was about sports, everything was about the consumption. My dad was a good athlete. He coached me in a lot of things. Speed up a little bit. My parents go through like a pretty significant divorce. I thought I had this like picture perfect home that was like challenging. And I started drifting away from just who I was. I started to feel that like different than, and almost like victim mentality, you could say. And people often talk about like that moment of arrival, the first time they like consume something. I remember mine being like a phone call. It was back when, cordless, like phone, you had the phone in the middle of the house, and I was drifting away from like the core group of kids that I spent time with. Okay. And I get this call and they're like, we're drinking up the street. And that was like, that feeling, it wasn't like the first time that I consumed alcohol. It was more the feeling of like being a part of again, And then I didn't have the insight at the time, but I started taking on the identity of the party guy, of the person that knew how to get booze, knew how to get drugs. Gambling was always a part, not super intensely from a young age, but I got really into the game of golf. Golf and gambling go really hand in hand. I remember the first paycheck I ever got, I like lost to coworkers on a putting green. And so like, I wouldn't say like my only drive for like to play a high level of golf was gambling, but it certainly was like exciting part of it. So high school was pretty normal, but also like I was lost underneath. I think people at that time in my life would say you have it figured out, but like deep down I was lost. And so my parents, and then it goes back to the sports, my parents thought like, well, if he sticks with the sports, like he'll be okay. So they sent me down to South Carolina. Tiger Woods at the time was getting coached by this guy, Hank Haney, big name in teaching golf and in the golf world. And he had this junior and like post-grad academy down there. And I was like the worst player there, but like I was around some guys that eventually made it on the PGA Tour. And so classic thing that I see now in my professional life is like, if Johnny, let's call him, like figures out school or figures out sports, like all this stuff with like the drinking and the gambling is gonna like go away, right? So I go down there for a year. I still like the identity is based in like, Friday comes around, you guys should drink more. A lot of these guys were super dialed in on like their process, and like I was still living for the day. I ended up at Sacred Heart University to play golf, and I lasted a very short amount of time and then quit. And I didn't even want to go to college, but I quickly fell in love with like what college really was for me, which was like free reins to gamble, drink, drug, and, do whatever. And somehow through, a lot of manipulation, I was able to graduate. There was this budding like alcohol, drug, and gambling issue. Many times in college, I would have to get bailed out to pay off bookies. I had a bookie show up on campus one day looking for me. That was pretty embarrassing. But I still was obsessed with this like external projection. My life was ran by making you believe, or people in my life at the time believe, that I had it like figured out, Okay. And I got really good at that.
Were you seeking approval from these people, or I guess what is the motivating force behind you looking back that caused you? Because I ask this because a lot of your story I can really identify with. So what do you think it was in you that wanted to maintain this image or this facade to all these other people or select people?
The codependency is I don't know exactly where it came from, but I can tell you that was my, my measuring stick. If you thought I was a good person, then I was a good person. If you didn't, then I had to work on why you thought that, and I was going to figure that out. I think a lot of it was trying to chase back those early childhood feelings, of like before all this stuff had gotten entered into my life. So I have this like budding drug and alcohol gambling, like full-blown addiction. But I also knew that I wasn't this like super destructive person, So I was in this internal conflict where I could still show up to a golf course and, oh, how you doing? Yeah, I'm doing great and all that stuff. But then at the same time the night before I might have gone and picked up an 8-ball of cocaine and, had a night, So it was this like, who was I? I don't really know. I cared more about like the parties and the scenes and the boys. I had my fun in college, but I wasn't, the guy getting all the girls. I wasn't, so like was some of it that, like, I mean, on a college campus, there's unfortunately this social equity that comes with being the guy that knows the most about sports, that is betting a lot on sports, that has the bag of cocaine in his pocket. And like, so I was kind of riding the wave of that. I found myself, I remember the day I graduated college, my parents had come down. They like got this reservation at the steakhouse in Stanford, and I just like completely blew it off. I didn't even like show up. And then the next morning was like when we walked for graduation. Okay. And then, my brother and sister are like mad at me because they're like, you're a mess. And I remember sitting, and then we went out to lunch, and I just remember, like, what are you going to do now? And it was like, that was like the first really scary day of my life, like actually, because my point of a college campus and that culture is it co-signs some of that behavior, right? But then the second you get that diploma, it's like, oh, a lot of my friends have been concentrating on internships and job placement and XYZ, and I've just kind of been living for today. And so that false projection of what I was putting out there was now, it was almost like I was pretending like I was studying for the test, and now the test finally came, and I didn't even know the question to the test, And so,
you didn't even know the class.
Yeah, I didn't know the class. Yeah, I didn't know anything.
Right.
So I graduate. And at this point, the numbers had gotten big. One of the things that I was able to do in those days, because of like, I would say at the time, like a pretty nasty relationship that my parents had, I was able to split them. And it comes up a lot in my work today, is I could go to mom and say, hey, I need this. And then I could go over to dad and need this. And they wouldn't be communicating and aligned on things. So that kind of kept the party alive.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So that really resonates with my personal experience. I caught myself in a situation exactly like yours where my mother and father were split. And I would play them and then play them against one another. And there was almost this manipulative underlying mindset that I had that I don't think anyone necessarily gave me. It's just I kind of backed into this.
Yeah.
And it was really, for me, to survive and get what I need by any means necessary.
Sure.
Very similar to my mindset when I was in active addiction. What do you think was going on inside of you while you're playing both sides of the fence, and like why were you doing it?
I do think there's a side of like going through, being a child of divorced parents where you learn those like behaviors and the norms of like both homes now. So you knew how to, dad wanted to hear about this, you knew mom wanted to hear about that. And so that was almost, to your point too, like just kind of like picked up, like I just like learned how to do that. And then really quickly after college, I went on like the biggest gambling run of my life, unfortunately. But now kind of I can sit here and say, fortunately, I had about $70,000, $80,000 in a shoebox. And that allowed me to do an 8-ball of cocaine every single night. And about a year after that peak of that run of the gambling side, it led me in my first rehab. And the first time I walked into rehab in Mountainside in Connecticut, it was a guy was there and he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, did you see this game? This game had ended in an Aaron Rodgers Hail Mary, and I had the other team. I had the Lions, and like that was the only reason I was there. That's one of the biggest differences between gambling and substance use, right? Like I always felt like if the ball bounced my way, I can maintain this party, right? So that's kind of my first intro into recovery. I had gotten arrested maybe like 6 months before that, and
6 months before the miracle.
Yes, the
Okay.
Thursday Night Miracle, yeah, game that haunts me. But no, it was a good thing. But I get arrested, and I started working with a guy who was sober that my family knew, and I remember the first time I went to an AA meeting. I smoked cigarettes at the time. I chain smoked a couple cigarettes on the way to this meeting, and I see a bunch of guys outside. It's like a Saturday morning meeting outside this church, and they're chain smoking cigarettes. And my first thought in my head is, what a bunch of scumbags smoking cigarettes, and it's just like the level of disqualification that I had, like I was not these people. So that didn't last very long, obviously, working with that guy. So I did have, the other thing I kind of wanted to mention too, because I think it ties into the professional work, is like my family also knew how tough the divorce was and what I was going through middle school, high school. I'd been introduced to counseling, traditional counseling, like pretty young in my life. Okay. And I would kind of fight it. I would go, I'd bounce around a couple guys, and but I wasn't, I look back on that as being something that's very important, because my family did always believe in it. Like my mom's gone, my dad's gone, my sister's gone. Everyone in my family has gone. But I guess for me as like a college student or a high school student, the traditional counseling thing just wasn't working. I couldn't get honest enough. But so yeah, I end up in treatment, and then I moved to a sober house in Brooklyn. And that was like my first real shot. Spent maybe 90 days sober, going to some meetings.
So sober from substances and gambling, or what's?
Both.
Okay.
Both. And so I'm going to AA and Gamblers Anonymous, GA, for the first time in my life. And I get a call from a buddy of mine, and he's like, we're going to go down to Key Island. All you need is the flight. Like, my dad's taking care of the greens fees, all this stuff. And everybody in my life is saying, don't go on this trip. Now, his father is sober, so I feel pretty good about it. But he doesn't, my friend knows, but my buddy's, his dad doesn't know where the gambling is. So I go down there against advice, and I end up gambling on the golf course, very like small level. But I knew that I had done something wrong, and I came back to New York and quickly relapsed on the drugs and alcohol. And within a couple months of that, I was in treatment center number 2 in New Jersey. My mom had tried to come and pick me up. We go like one block, and I jump out of the car, and I'm like, I'm going to kill myself. You're never going to see me again. And I basically was like ghost for like 3 or 4 days, which like, you can get sober and you can stop gambling and you can change your life, but there are some things that we put our families through that, like, I still feel a lot of guilt about that.
Even after going through a lot of different processes, whether it be 12-step or other spiritual-based recovery-oriented retreats or whatever, I still carry that guilt with me, but I know how to process it. It's not so much a burden.
Sure.
But it's interesting because one of the motivating factors in me staying sober is not going back to that space, not going back to that place.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So what you said really resonates with me. So I apologize.
No, you're good. I ghost for 4 days, and then I get picked up by this guy, and he's driving me down to South Jersey, and I'll never forget it. And he's like listening to, big book speaker tapes, and I'm just like, God, this guy, and he's like, see, alcohol is not your problem, it's your solution. And I'm just like, I'm going to treatment for the second time in like 6 months. Like, what do you mean? And I couldn't understand that, I couldn't understand that. And at this time too, I'm still in that behavior of, I got to be in the city with my friends from Sacred Heart, and I got to maintain that image and whatever it was. I mean, it was fading fast, but I still thought that was like what I needed. You know, like I needed to be a part of that crew. Most of them, you know, were already kind of distancing themselves from me. But
How old were you during this time period?
I was 25, 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I go to treatment center number 2. I come back to the same sober house in Brooklyn. And now I start relapsing even faster on the gambling and the drinking and the drugging. The next year of my life is like the darkest year. I'd go to some 12-step meetings, but then I'd go on a bender. I'd gamble when I could. It was super dark. Like it was completely alone. I was in this purgatory where I now been exposed enough to people that were walking a true life of recovery, but I just didn't know how to do it. You know, I just didn't, you know, and
Why?
it was all about the external still. Like I was living in New York City, I was living in Brooklyn, but I was like, it was still all about that, that outside, instead of just doing what was in front of me, which was like really focusing on my recovery. It was, how can I save $500 and then $1,000, and then anytime I do that, I'd get back on and find a new bookie, and I'd lose a bunch of money, and you know, and at this point, my parents are like really done. Like they had been done, but now they were like, they were done, and they, you know, as far as support and as far as like help.
Are you in the sober house? You're living by
No,
yourself?
so I was in the sober house for like a month after the second time, and I actually moved in with a girl, not a non-romantic relationship, with a girl who had like 4 years, and nobody knew that I had been using. So I was like projecting that I had like 60 days, and I had 60 seconds. You know, like it was just like, and that was really bad. So she was this like overnight nurse, great person, and like, but I had my whole, when she'd go off, I'd get my drugs and drinking and gambling and all this stuff. And I remember meeting a bookie in AA. That was pretty wild. And then I like tried to stiff him, and that was like became a whole thing because I felt justified that like, well, he solicited me through AA. That was pretty wild because it was like I still had to end up paying him, but it was like, you know, like this is supposed to be a safe space. What do you mean? I was always looking for like why this wasn't me. I think New York City in particular, I say this a lot to my clients, I know a lot of people get it here, but I also, for me, it represented the external, right? It represented like, what do? What do you know, money, expensive. I remember trying, and I would, you know, I maybe get through a Friday night, but then like Saturday was too long because I couldn't really afford to do like fun things, and playing golf was like impossible. Being outside, you know, it was just, you know, I always used to joke and like, you take the bars and restaurants out of New York City, like, I mean, how often was I actually going to be at like a museum? Like not frequently, you know, so I didn't.
You mean you weren't here for the museums?
Yeah, I know. Fast forward, that November 27th, 2016 is the last date of my last bet. Now, the only reason that it's that date and not February 8th, 2017, which is my sobriety date, is because everyone I knew, my friends that gambled, bookies that I knew, anyone I knew was done with me, and I couldn't find anyone. So like today, you know, people sometimes talk about, like, you'll hear a heroin addict say, you know, if fentanyl was on the street when I was using, I'd be dead. Like, I kind of feel the same way about, like, if the sports betting was regulated, I don't know if I'd be sitting here. It's like a Monday, I miss work again. I somehow, like, maintained this job, which was, like, kind of ridiculous. I'd go there for, like, 3 hours, and I was supposed to be, like, seeing clients every afternoon. And for, like, a year, I never saw a single client. I went straight to the package store, straight to the same bar, and, you know, just have a couple drinks and then go back and drink by myself. But I had used suicide in my past to manipulate, you know.
Okay.
hey mom, I'm like, I don't want to live. But it was all like a hoax for money to bail me out of some type of situation. Rent, a bookie, a drug dealer, whatever.
Did you ever actually consider it?
The
reason I ask you that is because I had caught myself doing the same thing, but there are also times where I wanted to stop so badly that it was going to be easier in my mind to finish myself than to continue on this path of unknown recovery. And I don't know how close I was, but let's just say I didn't have the noose around my neck.
Yeah.
And so I ask because suicidal ideation
Sure.
can go either way pretty
Yeah.
quick. So I'm glad you identified
Yeah.
your motive in that situation, but did you at any point during this process think, hey, today is the day that I just want to end it?
So one night, and it always I've never been able to pinpoint what really happened. This is even before I went to Mountainside. I go out, same buddy who I went to Kiowa Island with. I go out to Block Island, and I remember waking up, and I was on this 4-day coke bender. When you get into that type of state, the smallest things can make you feel like his little brother's friend might have said something to me that I didn't like, and I think I ended up in my own room. And the next morning, I still don't fully know, but I woke up to a vertical cut on my wrist. So, but it didn't scare me enough, right? It didn't scare me. That's years before, I even, probably 6 months before I went into treatment. So it wasn't and that kind of speaks to active addiction as a whole. I had a lot of those experiences in my life where I would have that sobering thought where it'd be, look at this situation, look at who you are. And to maintain active addiction, I need to quickly minimize that thought. I can't actually live in that. I'll never forget, I was in this really dark place, and I'd found this, I was teetering on the homelessness, space as well. Mm-hmm. I was at one point I was living in this hostel in Brooklyn, and then I found this guy to rent a room from, and I was great at covering it all up. I knew how to walk in and have a quick conversation and I'm just kind of getting back on my feet. I just broke up, bullshit someone and be able to so I ended up with this random guy, nice enough guy, and he's got no idea what he's kind of signing up for. I met him on, some internet site and whatever. And I had never sober thought about suicide, legitimately. And it got to a point where I was afraid to leave my apartment or go into a subway. And I call my mom and I'm I'll give it one more shot. I'm willing to go back to Mountainside. They had this indoor basketball court. I thought it was sweet. So she said something, and for whatever reason, she had probably said this to me hundreds of times. I have, at this point, I somehow have this job, but I have really nobody in my life. I actually have a couple friends in the 12-step world, but they're dude, we can't help you until you help yourself, And
they're telling you the stuff that you don't necessarily want to hear. They're trying to have a nutritious lifestyle, and they know you got 1 foot in, 1 foot out in a weird sense.
At best,
Right.
And so she says something, and I'll never forget this. This was, higher power, God moment, God shot. Was you don't get it. You're still always making your decisions. So I was always dictating the terms of my own treatment, right? My story at this point had been, really other than that opening 90 days, gambling would lead me back to drinking and drugging. Or I would strike bargains with my mom where it would be I'll be sober, but I'm going to gamble. Or I'm going to gamble, but I'm not going to be sober, right? And it was clearly evident for everyone other than me that I couldn't touch anything. And for whatever reason, I said, okay, and there's this place that I still work with a lot in Virginia called Williamsville Wellness, where they treat drugs and alcohol
What's it
and
called?
gambling. Williamsville Wellness.
Okay.
And I, I still, the only way I was going to go to treatment is if this guy I knew in Brooklyn would buy me a liter of Tito's, and I'd drink the liter of Tito's from Brooklyn to Sunrise Detox in New Jersey. It's probably like a 30-minute drive. It was late at night. It was probably like 9 o'clock. I walk in this detox and I blow like a .37. And like no one in the world at that time could have thought that would be my last drink. So I'm in detox for a couple of days, and I'm going to go down to Virginia. And I go down there, and this is when like the good stuff starts coming together a little bit. First couple weeks down there, oh yeah, after this I'm going to go back to Brooklyn, do the same thing. Therapist kind of pointed out, it's like, well, from kind of what I've unpacked here, it's like you go to treatment, then you go to Brooklyn, and it's not really working. Like, why don't you try something else? So once again, I had that moment of surrender where it wasn't I dictate the terms of my own treatment. Then I parlay that again, and I get really tight with this guy, Luke Wallet. He's in treatment with me. He's very open about his recovery. He played a year for the New Orleans Saints, big-time football player. So him and I are there together. We're kind of like, he was a much better athlete, but like we really clicked. We were just boys, and we moved to Florida together to this like sober house, and same thing. I'm on a train ride down from Richmond, Virginia to West Palm, and I have like nothing. I have like I'm making this major move. I really had nothing in Brooklyn, but I like in my mind it was like, and someone was like, okay, first thing you're gonna do is like find someone, and you don't ask them to be your sponsor. You're gonna go in there and say, can you take me through the book in 90 days, right?
Okay.
Like that was like, it was like, so this guy Bo spoke first night I was there. Can you take me through the book in 90 days? Go through the steps. That was obviously a big thing. This whole time I was always gonna be, I was never going to work in treatment. Everyone who worked in treatment was kind of like what you said at the top. Like, you're not in it for the right reasons. I don't trust you. Really quickly in South Florida, when you start doing the right thing, some doors opened up. Another friend of mine that I played a lot of basketball with was like, hey, I'm opening up a sober house. Do you want to be the house manager? And so now it's going to be like free rent. I was like 90 days in. So I was like 90 days in. And I was going to be kind of in charge of these like 15 guys. I spent the next year and a half with these guys who I don't think I ever had a guy in that house. Probably hundreds of guys came in and out of that house in that time. I never had a guy who had a college degree. I never had a guy who, some would have family in their life, some wouldn't. It was a lot of guys out of jail, off the street. And I never felt more okay than with those individuals. I felt I finally could let go of that keeping up with the Joneses and keeping up with, like, it was just, I get a job in treatment where I'm just like what's called like a behavioral tech. I'm making $14 an hour, but I'm playing basketball, I'm going to meetings. I'm starting to see guys like change in front of me, and I'm really like Vinny, my first boss, who gave me like a great opportunity early on, was like individual investment. He's like, you can never spend enough time with these guys. And I'll never forget, I was probably around 6 months when Irma hit, and so we had to evacuate the state, those who could. I was like the only guy out of 15 guys usually that would have a car, maybe one other. And my job was to get them to meetings, keep them accountable. My job was to find employers for them. I remember I packed the car up fully. I didn't have a lot of possessions. I had clothes, and my twin bed was provided to me. My dresser, I didn't have anything really. So I packed my car up, and I kind of think to myself, maybe this is the moment I like head back to the Northeast. And I find myself in Georgia, and I'm alone, because like at this point for 6 months, even though I was like managing the sober house, I was always in like these controlled environments,
Mm-hmm. A microcosm of the real world.
Yes.
Right? So you catch yourself in this managerial position at a sober house 90 days in. and you admittedly had some experience in recovery before, but I don't think that would necessarily qualify you to manage a house. Now you're at 6 months. What's that look like for you?
Like I was in the ICU right away. You know, all these guys were mostly IV heroin users, out of jail, and it was like they were looking at me for wisdom or accountability. And they were like scary, you know, like I was this like white boy from like a pretty decent family and had gone to, you know, I went to public school my whole life until college, went to a private, you know, Sacred Heart. Was just like a very, you know, I was in this controlled environments, and but I fell in love with some of the things that I would witness in the house. You know, you'd have a guy come in, and then you know, he'd start telling you something. It's like, oh, you're gonna fall in love with Gabe. He's like the same. He's also from Virginia, and blah blah blah. And like you would see the relationship start to develop, and that was like, that's what my skill set early on really was, right? It was like that connector of people, you know. And but yeah, I mean, I felt many times like I was way over my head, and like Vinny was great and would always be like, you know, we're in the, you know, a guy would go out or wouldn't come home, and new guy was going to want to come in the next day, and we're in the planting seeds business. We're not in the results business, you know. And you know, so around 6 months, Irma hits, and I'm thinking I might just like, you know, my life's like good there, but it's not like great. It's like in the hood. There's literally like a trap house next door. I think in my year and a half that I was down there, there was definitely like 2 murders on the street. Like it was not a good place. But I was, you know, so I go, it's around 6 months to 9 months, somewhere in there, and Irma hits, and I'm alone for like 5 or 6 days in Georgia, and I'm just like bouncing around. And I like find myself like doing the right thing when nobody's looking, you know, like I'm going to meetings, like, you know, I didn't have much money, so I like go to lunch, and then I might like find a park and like walk in it, or like look for a random basketball court and shoot some hoops. But then when I came back to Florida, I decided I'm not going to leave. I'm not just going to like leave with my tail between my legs. I'm going to like go back. And a lot of people in the house at the time were like, they would tell me, they're like, you were a different guy after that. It was that long into the process where I think it probably came more and more that I really believed in it. I had maybe $2,000 to my name, a car, and like I was going to meetings.
Life's
and
good.
I was doing the right thing. That was probably around the time where I was like, this is what my life's going to be. Your question about like how did I handle things, like, and you know, it was hard. We would have guys that we would give second chances to, and third chances to, and fourth chances to, and like one of the stories that like I tell a lot of the clients that I work with now, it's like sometimes a decision that can hurt other people is the right thing for you. I had to be in the wrong relationship to now be with my wife. I needed to have, you know, the wrong job to have the right job. I needed to, you know, and like that's really hard to hear when you already feel like you're behind in life, you know. But I got off, for the most part, I got off that like I need to get to this level at this point, and I got to be making, like I got away from that. And Florida kind of, like the geographic did give that to me, because it gave me, like I didn't know anyone. All the relationships I was developing down there were new. They didn't know past Brian. They didn't, you know, my friends back up here, you know, the ones that really like still cared for me would check in on me. And then like I really let go a lot of people, which is not easy to do, but it's so.
It seems like it was necessary, though.
Oh, 100%.
You know? And I'm a firm believer that sometimes if you let go or don't invest in those relationships anymore, if they're truly organic, they'll come back around.
Yeah, 100%. I knew I wanted to go back to school, and I found out about Collegiate Recovery Programs. Now, I was good in Florida. I'm like a guy who grew up in the Northeast, but like hates the cold and hates the, you know, so like I was good with Florida, you know. So I reached out to a couple schools down there. They were like, who the hell are you? You know, you're like, you're a guy that has a year sober, like, and you want us to start some program, you know. So that didn't really like go too well. But I luckily even like found out about Collegiate Recovery, which a lot of people don't even really know, especially, I mean, this is 2018, early 2018. And so I'm like, I got to get back to school. I'm going to become a counselor. And I get in touch with Fairfield University. And now, mind you, we had built up this sober house to always being full. Vinny had purchased another house, so now I was kind of helping out oversee that house, and it was like powerful. You know, we had some guys that changed their lives. We also like lost guys, you know. So Fairfield's like, I talked to them in like early August of 2018, and they're like, "Can you be here in 2 weeks? Like the job's yours if you come."
Okay.
And
I didn't realize it was that fast.
It was fast.
So you have to build a new social circle, new job, new environment.
Yeah.
And kind of turn your back, relatively, on what had become your norm.
It was like a no-brainer, right? Nicer house, you know, and but all I knew was like a rougher demographic. So there was this guy who was my roommate for many years in the sober house in Florida, and well, basically everyone we ever had there didn't have insurance. So if they relapsed, if they were someone who was like at least trying, we would sometimes say, you know, in the public detoxes there, we're always so full.
As in it's tough to get a bed?
Tough to get a bed.
Okay.
We would sometimes, to show willingness, and I wouldn't like advise this, you know, but this is kind of what, it was bare bones. It was, you know, it wasn't, you know, it was $150 a week per bed. It wasn't like anyone, you know, no insurance, no money coming in from the state, or, you know, we would make guys Baker Act themselves, you know, basically, which is like going into a hospital and saying like, I don't feel safe, and they have to get held for like 48 hours. And, you know, because they weren't safe enough to be in the house, we didn't want them on the street. It showed the rest of the house, you know, that they were willing to try.
And at least receive some form of medical support.
Yes, correct.
And also, I think it's challenging, you know, some people that are listening might be like, oh, well, that's unethical. But in fact, I don't think it is at all.
Yeah.
Because when you have no insurance or you're on state insurance, navigating the pathways or gaining access to certain recovery avenues is extremely challenging. It's almost an art in itself.
Oh, yeah.
I can remember, for instance, being in Suboxone treatment and the guy saying maybe you needed different levels of care, and I had no clue, you know, back in 2014, how to navigate that space.
Yeah.
So I completely understand, and that really resonates with me. So you're doing that with guys in the house, and what?
So there's this one guy that you want to talk about, like individual investment, that I'm a big believer in. His name was Corey, and he was, I spent so many nights with this guy. You know, he lived 4 feet away from me in the twin bed, and it was like, you know, he'd put together 30 days, he'd relapse, we'd give him another shot, you know, again and again. And, you know, at this point, the rest of the house was kind of like, you know, he should be out. We don't want him here. And I was the relationship in the house kind of keeping him, you know. And so Fairfield U comes along and is like, you know, for me, like still making $15 an hour, like, you know, I could get a free master's degree. I could live in a better place, in a better area. My third niece was just born. Yeah, and it was, so I was like, they're up in Massachusetts. I can be more closer to them. But I knew if I took that job, that Corey would eventually leave the house. He stays in touch with me probably a month after I leave. He says I moved out. I say that's a terrible idea. You're not working a strong enough program. You're not whatever. Probably a month after that, I get the call. OD and gone. You know? So like my point being, and why I share that story, like obviously I miss Corey, and you know, he was a great friend. It was the right decision for me. You know, I have a baby now, a wife. If you really care in this space, I mean, it can really drain you, you know, and it can really, I struggle at times even being home, like being present with my wife, the gifts that have been given to me, like really being present and enjoying them, because I'm still, how do you think he's doing? What do you think he's doing right now? What do so,
you're there, but you're not present.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're not there too, because crazy things happen in space. So I completely understand that,
so
and that resonates with me.
It's definitely like, an occupational hazard. So I get to Fairfield, and I remember when I first got there, it was like, I remember calling Vinny, and I was like, all these guys drive Audis and BMWs. I don't know if I'm in the right place, because it was a completely different socioeconomical background, which brings a whole different, like the basics are the same, right? Like meetings, gratitude, connecting and connection, but like, when you're dealing with more entitlement, it's different. But I was so excited and loved like watching college students navigate like sobriety. Like to me that was like, jail or like college campuses, like some of the toughest atmospheres. So that experience then just made me believe more, again, kind of like that Georgia trip, like this is real. We graduated a lot of people. I was there for 4.5 years, and then, some of the best memories of my life. It was almost like in a way I got to rewrite college, because I got there about like 28. So I was like just young enough where like when I played pickup basketball with them, where like they're like, hey, that guy looks pretty old, but like he's still, so it was like, but it was like I got to rewrite those years, and while being like a leader to the, older brother to these guys. And, the things you see in like sober houses are just like, it's the best. Like when it's working, it's the best. When guys are like picking, willing to like go out of their way for the other guy, it's like such a magical thing to just like, I was living next to it. I was living in it. It's not like 9 to 5, see you later, I'll see you tomorrow, weekends I'm off. This is like, you're 24/7 living. So I did that. I lived in sober houses as a manager for like 6-ish years,
So you're at Fairfield. Mm-hmm. Are you living in the house with other students that are actively pursuing recovery, but they're undergrads or grads, or what's the design of that type of program? The
design is, it's not, one of the common misconceptions is like, I saw you went to Hofstra, right? So it's not like, okay, you're doing a bunch of OxyContin and then you come, like send them over to Brian, right? Okay. Like we're getting guys who have gone through some type of treatment that are coming in with some substantial time, 90 days the lightest, a lot of like 6 months to a year. Okay. They're coming back to then get their degree after they've been a little bit established in sobriety. So it's okay. But you're navigating like, you don't control the classroom, and the classroom's talking about going down to the beach and getting drunk and, all these things. So it's like you have a safe house right across from campus, but you can't keep, them sheltered from like the reality of college life. But they can come back and they're going to get tested, and they're going to, we're going to hold meetings. We do a lot of recreation stuff. Sober basketball game Friday nights. Going on a lot of trips, go to Vermont every winter, go to Cape Cod, like fun stuff. Because it's like you've removed drugs and alcohol, which is such a big part of the college experience. Mm-hmm. And so like, how do you fill that, right? Like, how do you have fun and then not just being like, well, I'm just here to get my degree and go out. Like, I need to enjoy life. And that's like, that was such a privilege to like watch guys go through that. And I was kind of the same. I was just, for me, it was a grad degree, and I had to oversee and manage them and keep them accountable. And, but it was like, I was also a student navigating recovery back in college,
Right. I find that fascinating and actually very important because when I was at Purdue for 3 years, then Hofstra, I knew that I had a problem. I didn't know where I could go with it. Mm-hmm. It was a problem some days and not a problem others. I was playing sports, but also this recovery-based community in this microcosm of the real world at a university. Mm-hmm. I didn't think there was a community of people that were seeking recovery, right?
Yeah.
My community, or where I identified myself, was almost this alter ego of drinking and partying and football and, you know, and so I think that it's great that, you know, one, you found yourself in this situation, but two, at certain universities, these programs do exist.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I would bang this drum a lot with leadership there and then at Sacred Heart, where to your experience, it proves it. It's like, I kind of believe that every college student is going to run into this. Ideally, it's not them who develops the addiction issue. I'm working with a guy right now who was a Fairfield student who knew a guy that I had in the Fairfield house, right? And just like watching him enter the process of trying to change is inherently easier because he knew this student. And it was like, yeah, like, you know, I know, you know, so-and-so, and therefore it's like there's hope there. When I entered the world of recovery, to the same thing as you, like I didn't know anyone that was sober. I certainly didn't know anyone in college that was sober. I mean, I think there's still a lot to go. I do think like social media and things like you're doing is like helping that a lot, you know. Like I remember when I first was in my first rehab at Mountainside, they would like use recovery all the time. Like recovery, I'm in recovery, I'm in recovery. Now, I was like, I've never heard that. You know, like if I called my friend and was like, hey, I'm in recovery, he'd be like, what'd you, like tear your ACL? Like, you know, like it was like, it was not this term. I mean, only like 10 or 12. So the first time, probably 10, 11 years ago was the first time I was in treatment. Like the word recovery in society has like changed a lot, which is good. That's like decreasing stigma right there, you know?
Right.
But like, yeah, I mean, I think it's super, and I think, you know, when a college student can break, you know, and own who they are, that's like the wave that they can have in people is like super important, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're at Fairfield, and then you make this transition to Sacred Heart, or what's the design? So you're at Fairfield, and then you end up at Sacred Heart. What was going on? Same type of program?
Yeah, so Fairfield's like the oldest collegiate recovery program in New England, and it probably started in like if I got there in 2018, it probably started in like 2014 or 2015.
Okay.
So Sacred Heart's right down the street. They kind of, you know, saw what was going on in Fairfield. They wanted to start the same thing. They got some money together, and they had tried to get it off the ground, and then I went over there and got it going, and I was there a little under probably 2 years, and we launched a male house and then a female house, and it was pretty surreal being back there because that was where a lot of the damage was done. Use and gambling started long before college, but like that's really where it kind of like sped up, and they were great. Yeah, and it still runs today. Like a friend of mine in recovery now is like the house manager, and so it's going well. Yeah.
A friend of mine in recovery brought this point up to me, and it kind of highlights what you're talking about. We were going to grab some food, and there was a particular street that I used to cop on, and you know, I had these negative thoughts associated with that particular area. And he goes, yeah, now you can rewrite it with this experience. And I think that's powerful in recovery, to maybe go and live new experiences in places where you might not have had the most nutritious experiences. I'm not saying, you know, run to the north end of Hartford and, you know, hang out on Barber Street, but rather, you know, your experience going back there allowed you to kind of not rewrite the narrative, but write over with new tape, with fresh, nutritious experiences that are truly gratifying and where you can enjoy and kind of embrace the moment in a different light than you did in the past, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And like, especially like it really solidifies that kind of experience that I think a lot of us get to kind of live out, which is like if I hadn't done what I had done, right? Like there was no way I would be in this position. So it's a good way to lift that guilt of those experiences, because it's like I wouldn't be working in the field of addiction if I didn't come close to ending my life because of addiction. like it's just,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. One of my biggest challenges in life is like, it's nice to like really talk and break it down, some of those, the year in Brooklyn and like the journey, because I think sometimes like life gets better and I forget about how difficult it was and how I'm just like lucky to be even breathing, and so I have to remind myself of that.
So you're at Sacred Heart for 2 years running this program, and then what happens?
So basically, even before that, I had started working privately, like specifically on gambling cases.
Okay.
I had known, I would say way back from the Florida days, that gambling was going to kind of be my like niche, but it was almost like the substance use was like my vehicle to get there, right? It's like running the sober houses and things like that. And then like 2018, the Supreme Court comes in and says, hey, let's allow states to decide if sports betting's legal. Here we are in 2025, just about all the states are. And you have a massive, almost like, I like to say it's like the oxy stage of the opiate epidemic. So yeah, I would say for the last like 5 years, I've been doing private like coaching work specifically in gambling, like while I was getting my master's. And then that just got bigger and bigger, and it was hard leaving like the collegiate recovery space, but it was the right move. And I work primarily with men, a lot of young men, a lot of ex-athletes, a lot of guys that their whole identity is based in sports or watching sports. Gambling is a massive public health issue, and I kind of find myself in this spot where, unfortunately the phone's ringing a lot. I'll give you an example of my day-to-day. It's like, I'll get a call and it's like, my son just lost $50,000 and he's 20 years old. What do I do? The first thing I say on the phone is, although I haven't placed a bet in over 8 years, your son is in a massively more difficult landscape of trying to stop gambling than I was, because of the free play and the FanDuel and the DraftKings and come over here and bet there and bet there. So it's completely different. Yes, like fundamentally recovery is going to look the same, but the amount that it goes on is insane. Like I remember when I was in college, you found the people that really knew it, right? There's a language to it, lines, spreads, that like all these networks and leagues are doing a good job of educating the whole world on, right? Like I've seen SportsCenter clips of like, this is what a parlay means. They're like they're just educating society. But in my day, not that long ago, it's not like that. I graduated undergrad in 2013. There was like a couple of us that really knew it.
Right.
I remember being back at Fairfield in 2018. You just kind of hear chit chat on the sideline of a basketball game, and it's like they're all talking it, right? They're like the language is just developed so rapidly, and everybody knows it.
Yeah, I see it in sports. It's funny because my girlfriend, she's from a different country, and I love watching the playoffs in pretty much any sport. I don't tend to chime in during the regular season. I just don't have that energy or bandwidth or attention straight up. But she'll ask, she's like, what are these numbers? And I'm like, well,
yeah.
100%. It's funny.
100%.
It's definitely in your face. So when you get a phone call, whether it's from a potential client, their family, whoever, how do you make a determination in gambling abuse, and full-blown addiction?
Yeah, no, great question. It's definitely, there's multiple assessment tools that I use. So yeah, you will get that call where it's, Johnny he had a rough 1 month and he dipped his toe and he went a little too far and he's really not like, but usually that might just be gambling, right? That might be, a card game gone wrong for a couple weeks, or betting on a sports book on campus, and then that got really intense for a month. Full-on addiction, I'm looking at things like how much is it based in that individual's identity? How many things is it taking away from? Like how are they performing academically or professionally? How are they showing up for other things in their life? How are they, sleep hygiene, things like that? I mean, first, there needs to be like an evaluation, a conversation done, an assessment. Like right away, it might be straight to, Williamsville Wellness or Alchemist, like really the two main residential programs for gambling, right? So like right away, like he needs a higher level of care. I think there's really two things that you're really working on. You're working on like the individual, right? So like Thomas, what type of betting are you doing? How much is your identity-based betting? There's softwares that I use that can like block some of these sites. I'll do some like financial oversight where it's like, all right, he's going down to $20 a day. It's going to be monitored tightly. But then so you're kind of like working with the individual, but you're also working with like the family system, like the parents maybe, or other people, wife, spouse, whatever, where it's like, why does he have access to this money? Why does he, so you're almost trying to, like, if it's not the bottom now, you're almost trying to like speed up the bottom by firmer financial boundaries, right? But the art in it is really, it all goes back to that individual investment, right? Like you need to get that individual to trust you, to feel safe with you, to feel connected, to feel that you're not against them, but you're for them. I definitely think each client kind of, there's some general things that I'm always, sports consumption is something I talk a lot about. One of the questions I often find myself in like a first conversation asking is like, let's say it's a 22-year-old, right? And I'll say, if I handed you 10 grand cash, like what do you think would change, right? And like, all my problems would go away. Well, what do you mean? I owe this guy money. Okay. Well, like, let's say you don't have any debt and you just have $10,000. Like, what do you think would change? And a lot of times you unpack that I had this too, like this unhealthy, deep down insecurity, right? And wanting that external validation that we touched on. And money in sports became this thing that I realized the world cared about. So maybe that $10,000 would, it's like the $10,000 isn't actually going to do what you think it's going to do, right? It's not going to all of a sudden give you the most beautiful girlfriend. It's not going to all of a sudden make you, have straight A's, right? So it's like, it's unpacking some of that. But then, especially on the college campus side, right? Like, what is college? It's like, it's your launch into, the next stage of life. So you have a lot of guys sitting around, they're not playing sports at the college level. They're absorbing, they're watching sports, and they're like trying to become independent men, right? And here's this shiny thing, oh, I already love sports, here's gambling, like it makes a lot of sense. So, I oftentimes think that one of the processes of changing for specific gamblers who might not be dealing with a substance use issue, why it's so difficult is like that intention initially might have been pretty pure, right? It's like, well, my family makes a lot of money and they kind of groan that they gotta, stroke my tuition check every semester. So like here I am, I'm just trying to make a buck, right? So, or, I've had guys that, the sports knowledge that they have is just so deep, and for me to try to interject and like change up some of that behavior is like, that can be like a challenge. The other thing outside the legalization of it is the technology, right? So like in my day, you might have to sit there and like auto refresh like a website. Now you can watch all these games live. You can bet 24/7 across the world and something's going on at some time. So it's just it's like such a big beast. Okay, you should stop gambling. Well, I still feel like the broke kid at a bar on a Friday night. I see a lot of highly depressed, very like everything is boring other than being in action, right? Because one of the things that scares me the most currently at the landscape of like the country is I'll be working with an individual who, let's say, is under the age of 30 years old and has already lost 6 figures due to gambling. And I'm getting to, early on in the process of our conversation, I'm getting to know and evaluating their social circle, right? And like where they stand. And a lot of times, I would say in the last like year or two, I'll hear things like, well, yeah, my 10 friends that I'm in college with, they all gamble too. There are 3 or 4 that are worse than I am, right? So like when I hear that, that's like, whoa. I think the misconception out there for people who've never like struggled with gambling or anything like that is like, it's just during the game, right? But when you get into the depths that we're talking, by the time someone would call someone like me, it's like you're either thinking about who you're betting on, how you're getting the money for the next bet. It really takes over your life. And then I think the other piece that makes treatment more difficult, a lot of times it's almost like, you know, some of the cases I've worked are almost insane to think about, right? Like, you know, laundering money through a business or laundering money from a spouse or laundering money, like, and, you know, you'll hear the family around, we had no idea, right? The substance use side, you can't, you know, there's physical symptom, right? So like, you know, you smell like vodka all the time. You're nodding off. You're jumping off the wall on a bag of Coke. So like the level of dishonesty and like liar, you know, mentality that I've seen is like, it's scary, right? Like I said, I think it's the oxy stage where, you know, long before oxys, you know, existed, there was, you know, guys in lower socioeconomical, you know, areas shooting up heroin and dying. And then it started attacking, you know, suburbia and upper middle class white kids. And then we started seeing some change. I think that the lottery and scratch offs and casinos have been going on for a long time. But, you know, it's kind of, you know, the joke I always used to hear growing up was like, oh, the lottery, the tax on the poor, right? That was like a phrase that
crack.
Yeah, correct. So, you know, now I think the sports is going to hook this different type of background, and it shouldn't take that to really change some of the stuff, but like...
Such a wider net, though, with such a heavy sports culture on a comparative basis to so many other countries. It's not just like soccer or like cycling, you know, like we have sports, there's always a game, we got 160 baseball, like year round. We are a sports culture.
100%. Sports culture, money culture, and there's been some pushback. And I think the scary thing is that the engine that the sports betting companies are pushing are, you know, insane, right? Like, I think that's a really scary thing. It kind of really annoys me when I see these big athletes on these commercials with these sports books. I just don't even think they understand what's going on, you know, for some of the population. Like, a lot of the numbers are very similar, you know, like substance use, 4 to 6% of the population just can't handle substances, you know, normally. Gambling is showing a lot of the same data. It's getting worse and worse, and but I'm definitely looking for identity. You're 4 times more likely if you're an ex-athlete. You're 2 times more likely if you struggle with substance use. So I had both of the, you know, now I'm multiplier, I'm way up there. And then the other thing I'm packing is like the messages that they got about money growing up, right? If I'm quickly sensing that this individual, all they care about and that might be a learned thing from, you know, their parents and their extended family, that like money is all that matters.
Well,
you know,
some of these companies are publicly traded.
Correct. Like the joke I make is like, I never threw a bag of cocaine in the backyard with my dad, right?
That would be strange.
Like, yes, that would be strange. But I like obviously like played sports in the backyard with my dad, right? So like when you're talking to someone who struggles with substance use, you might be that like initial point might be 12, 13, 14, I had my first rip of a joint, or I had my first beer, you know, where like sports and that relationship, I mean, that's like their earliest memory in life. So you're like unpacking, so you'll have families. Should we watch sports around them? Should we not? Should we just never talk about it? Should we, you know, and that's something that like you constantly are navigating. And there are some similarities obviously to substance use, but there's there's a lot of differences,
100%. I almost feel as though it would be impossible with my family, just because my brothers and my dad just loved sports. And it was actually funny, I didn't realize this while we were at my dad's funeral, but my brother kind of gives me a nudge and he's like, what's this? I was like, I don't know who that guy is. He goes, that was Dad's bookie.
Really?
Yep. And I guess he was a good guy, but I don't know. And I was like, bookie. I was like so old school in my head, But it's interesting. It's interesting, just thought provoking, I guess. And so I guess that kind of leads me to this: is like, you've identified substance abuse in yourself. You've identified the process abuse of gambling. I think those go hand in hand.
Yeah, sure.
Especially in this situation, I can say that for myself as well. But I love sports, right? I love sports. How do you balance that equation for yourself today?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say a lot of suggestions that you'll hear in the 12-step world when it comes to like Gamblers Anonymous will say something like, don't watch sports for a year. I would say I didn't do that perfectly. I would say I consumed about 1% of what I had done, maybe 1 to 3% of the year before. I got a lot more into playing basketball again and playing sports and the gym and like just being more active. So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing with my guys too, right? Is like, oh, you say you love the NBA and you can't stay away from betting on the NBA. Well, when's the last time I'm 25, but I haven't played basketball since my junior year in high school. It's like, well, let's change that,
Right.
Like, let's just get up and change it. So that's kind of why I still operate from that like coaching model where it's more peer-based and like, let's go do stuff together, and then almost like backdoor some of like the clinical work. I kind of was taught everything I do in life is either closer or further away from a bet or a drink or a drug, right? So for me personally, if all of a sudden I watch 4 hours of sports on a weekend, like I tend to not eat as well. I don't do exercise. And I have to know and have that awareness, like, well, that's because of like you watching more sports. And then if I kept ramping that up, then all of a sudden I might get an opinion on a game, and then I might say, oh, and then we call, a lot of this, like, if you can't watch without saying like, oh, if I know I'm not gambling, but I'd be gambling, you learn about that like built-in forgetter in like AA, right? Like kind of the equivalent I would say in gambling is kind of this like, let's say the Patriots are playing the Jets, and it's like, oh, I would have bet the Patriots, right? And the Patriots win, right? And it's like, well, if I win, I'd say, I just lost out on like, whatever my bet size was. I could have made 5,000. Yeah. Where if I had picked the Jets in my mind, even though I didn't bet it, you would like quickly forget that, right? You would quickly forget like your wrong opinion, right? So like that would be like, to me, that's always like being in both fellowships. Like that's like the built-in forgetter for like the gambler.
It's biased, and there's actually clinical stuff that I've read behind that.
Yeah. Depending on the situation, right? Like you can, if you've put yourself in debt and holes that are going to take decades, right? Like it's like, well, why don't I keep trying to hit that big one?
Just double down,
just
whatever.
Keep going, and like where substance use, I feel like in the substance use world, you get a quicker, faster return. What I mean by that is like, let's say you're doing heroin every day. You're going to have a tough withdrawal. Hopefully you're medicated. After that, 2 weeks, a month, you're like in the gym, you're working out, you're like doing things. Right now, you can do that from recovering from gambling, but like you get a quicker like response based on it. I often talk to my gamblers about like neutral is forward, right? Because like if you just are staring at some big amount of debt or financial restrictions that you're now living under because your family's overseeing your money or taking hold of your money, like you kind of got to like get into this where it's like, and kind of get away from that that mindset of like my whole worth is based in what's in my FanDuel account or what's in my checking account or my investment accounts. Like we're trying to get away from that, but I've just always found that like there's like a faster change in energy for someone that stops drinking or using at like the 30-day mark compared to like gambling, right? Like you're at 30 days and you feel better and you're not sitting there glued to ESPN, but you're not, the physical side is different, right? Like it's more of an obsession. It's more of a mental thing where you're sober for 30 days and you're feeling great physically. You're getting better. You're getting stronger every day where, so that's a big difference, I think.
Understood. So can you give us a quick snapshot of where you're at today and how you kind of navigate your life to maintain your sobriety,
Sure.
Be a family man, also have a private practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm still an active member in multiple 12-step fellowships, AA and GA. I go to therapy. I'm a big believer in my own therapy. At this point, basically everybody that I talk to in my life, whether it's personally or professionally, like has some, they're in recovery themselves. The network's gotten like so big and wide and vast as far as like people that I know. I think where I still struggle at times is that like imposter syndrome, like I'll pull into the driveway at the house and it's like, this is my house, like this is my wife, this is my baby, So I still fight a lot of that, and that's why I need and I'm a big believer in the outside help and the therapy stuff. The more that I think about it, the more that, it's the life beyond my wildest dreams, which like that in of itself, although it's true, is also like really scary, it's like that's my life every day, and like I feel very supported. Like for example, my wife is someone that never knew the other side of me. Like I could tell some of these stories that I say, and like her and her family who are at the house all the time and great people and great, upbringing and all that, they're like, they don't even know that version of me.
They probably don't want to.
They don't want to for sure. So it's like that is it's been really interesting like 4 months ago with like Cooper and like the baby. Cooper's my son's name, and like that was something even in recovery I think I probably like swore off. So like these are all the things that like kind of I still can struggle with and overthink, and and it's wild. I would say when I got over to Sacred Heart and we were really trying to like make some noise about it, and like get the program off the map, like I wasn't open about my recovery. I wouldn't get on a podcast or get on a, do an article for a paper or some of the things that I've gotten to do, or ESPN that I got to do. That was all like, I don't know, in the last couple of years, which I feel good about, but it's still kind of like, what are his friends going to think? What are, like it's just, so you still live with some of that shame, and it's like, even when I know it's the greatest thing I'll ever do, is beat this a day at a time if I can continue doing the work,
I've talked to several people in recovery about this, and I don't want to offend you by saying this, but as much as this is about you, it's really about the people that are listening and watching.
100%.
It really is.
Absolutely.
It is. All right, well, Brian, thank you for joining us today. Click subscribe. We have multiple episodes rolling out. Brian Dolan's contact info will be in the description below. Feel free to contact him if you're in the city, the surrounding New England area, if you are experiencing issues with gambling, or if you're just curious and want to have a conversation about your situation around your gambling. Sending you nothing but love and good vibes. Thank you for joining us today, and make it a great day.